If my people, which are called by my name, shall humble themselves and pray, and seek my face, and turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven, and will forgive their sin, and will heal their land.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Hello, Christian patriots, and welcome to Church and State, where we strive to plug you into the pew and plug you into politics. I'm your host, Caleb Collier. With me, as always, Pastor Gabe Blomgren.
But it is part two. I am excited to get back into this. If you're a Facebook listener, we have William Jasper, the senior editor at the New American, with us, and we were just talking about a very important story about the elevators at the Oklahoma federal building. So let's get right back into it.
So just for our audience, once again, this is part two of where we're discussing, the Oklahoma City bombing. It's just past the 25-year anniversary of this. William Jasper is joining us, senior editor of the New American magazine, which is the magazine that the John Birch Society publishes. Bill Jasper has written a number of books. Wrong person. Global Tyranny and Step by Step the United Nations Exposed. I almost started reading Gary Benoit's resume there for you. But Bill Jasper, thank you again so much for joining Church and State.
Thank you, gentlemen.
All right, so as Gabe stated, we were just getting into the story and then the more plausible story that they tried to come up with. But I am going to back you up just a little bit because it was right at the end of the show there. Hit upon the elevator story again and the individual who actually operated those and how he destroyed their tail.
Right. Well, very early on, people were concerned, including survivors or family members of those who didn't survive. They're going, well, how come the ATF agents were not at their office that morning? Did they have some kind of foreknowledge that this was going to take place? And after all, Timothy McVeigh and those associated with him ostensibly were doing this in retaliation for the ATF's role at Ruby Ridge and Waco, where, particularly at Waco, where many innocent women and children were killed. And so supposedly this was the motivation for Timothy McVeigh, and the ATF was really the prime target of this. They were one of many agencies at the Alfred P. Murrah building in Oklahoma City, which also included a daycare center where dozens of children were killed. So people were asking this question, and so the ATF came up with this story that, well, yes, the ATF agents were in the building that morning. They were in an elevator, and when the explosion went off, they were trapped. The elevator fell. They were trapped in the elevator shaft. And, of course, that story quickly was decimated when a number of witnesses, the most important one being the owner of the elevator company that serviced that. He had the contract on the building, and he was there moments after the bombing. He was one of the first people inside, and he was the first professional photographer to take hundreds, literally a couple thousand photos at that time, inside and outside of the building. He does that for his work. He has to document that everything's in working order, and so he was intimately familiar with the building, and so he had very valuable photos that, as we explained before, bear upon what actually happened in there, particularly the forensic evidence of explosives inside the building. So his testimony and others, I won't get into all of the other additional witnesses, showed that no, the elevator didn't fall. They weren't trapped inside the elevator. Sounds nice on Hollywood, but that isn't how it works. And so that story fell apart. And so the ATF then had to come up with some other additional stories. And this is important because many of the family members became convinced, and other evidence showed us that, yes, the ATF did know that there was going to be a bombing there that morning. And that's why they weren't there. So why wasn't everybody else alerted to it? And why was this truck allowed to come up there? And why were the explosives planted inside the building not discovered and disarmed. So that started us down the whole road of a number of different branches called foreknowledge and forewarning. And among the many things that we came up with, there were two federal undercover witnesses, operatives, who we had almost exclusive access to, while CBS, NBC, ABC, New York Times, everybody was trying to get a hold of them. They only were giving us information. So I had the first major interview with Carol Howe. Carol Howe was a Tulsa debutante who infiltrated the Ku Klux Klan, White Aryan Resistance, and Elohim City for the ATF and the U.S. Marshals, and the FBI. So she was providing them with information, and she claimed that she had warned them about the Oklahoma City bombing coming. So how do you know that somebody isn't just grandstanding to be an important witness, or that they actually have provided that information and it was not acted upon for whatever reason? How do you sort all that out? Well, that was a very lengthy thing, and I was able to meet with her, information from her, interview her, and to get documents from her from the ATF showing the dates on which she had worked for them, because they tried to downplay her, as often happens if somebody is coming forward with information, a whistleblowing that you don't want them to. You have to discredit the messenger, discredit the whistleblower. So there was a lot of effort to discredit her, but every time we looked into deeper, she became more and more credible. And it showed that, yes, indeed, she had given forewarning. Another important witness, which we had exclusive access to for a time until he was Kerry Gagan. Kerry Gagan, we did stories on him. He claimed to have actually brought explosives into the country with the knowledge and the supervision of the U.S. Marshals Service to be used by. He said he had never met with Timothy McVeigh or Terry Nichols, but he met with other guys in Las Vegas and in Henderson, Nevada, who he believed were working with them and provided explosives to them. So that opened up a whole series that we had to go to Las Vegas and to Henderson, and some of the people that were involved with this were Hezbollah, PLO people who were very dangerous people, and so I couldn't get anybody to go there. So I had to go there when friends of mine were meeting at the Special Operations Association convention in Las Vegas. There's all these guys that are special ops people. And I said, hey, because a lot of them were reading my stuff in the New American. I said, hey, I've got a part of this that's in Las Vegas, but I'm not going there by myself. Will you guys back me up? And so I had a bunch of special ops guys that tailed me and stayed with me when I was trying to track down some of these guys in Las Vegas. Kerry Gagan's testimony that he gave prior warning before the bombing hinged on an important part, and that was, which we did write about. There's a lot of the things that we still haven't written about, and some of the witnesses that we had initial contacts with and we're going to do additional meetings with us who mysteriously died, were suicided with very unusual suicide methods.
Can we actually get into that a little bit?
Yes, we'll get, remind me of that. We'll get
right.
into it. So Kerry Gagan, this was one of these real cloak and dagger type of things. Nobody could get in touch with him, but he got in touch with me. And he said, "Are you Jasper?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "This is Gagan." He said, "Kerry Gagan, this is Gagan. I want you to meet with me." And so I don't know if it's Gagan or whether it's somebody that's claiming to be. And he says, "Okay, so I want you to go to the light rail and take it to the airport. And so, and when you get to the airport, go to parking lot, whatever it was, C, and get out there, and you'll see a telephone booth 100 yards ahead, and go there. And so I didn't have, and he said, come alone. So, so I thought about it, prayed about it. Do I really want to do this? I thought, well, I really need to. So I went and followed the directions, get out there, and I look at this telephone booth, and there's only about a dozen cars in this big thing. I go, I've seen this movie before. You get in the telephone booth, the car starts up and runs over the booth.
Yep.
So and because it's on at the airport, I couldn't bring any firearm along, which I usually have on hand. So anyway, I go there, I get in the telephone booth. Cell phones were still at this time in 95 in rudimentary stage. They were this big, you know, great brick, you know, and I didn't have one of those. I did for some parts of the investigation. So I get in there, the telephone rings, and he says, I'm going to turn on my lights. And he turned on, I saw a car turn on its lights. He says, walk to the lights. And I go, oh, great. Some guy with a 12 gauge is so, anyway, so I walk down there, and he has the window down. He says, Gagan, get in, you know. And okay, somebody with a garrote is behind the seat.
Wow.
So anyway, he got in, and he's driving. He started talking to me. He says, I got a whole bunch of documents right there in a bag for you. And he started going a mile a minute on everything that was there. And we started driving around, drove down town. Now, this is in Denver. This is in Denver because the trial was taking place in Denver, and that's where he was. That's where he worked as an undercover operative for the marshals. But he also worked in Oklahoma City and Tulsa, and he also went down to Mexico on this assignment. So he started telling me all this stuff. I didn't know whether to believe him or not at first. I said, well, you know, I've got to see evidence. I said, what evidence do you have that you warned the marshals on April 8th and April 7th or 8th? Anyway, it's in my stories. And he said, well, I took a taxi there, and here's the taxi receipt, and here is a copy of the letter which I gave to them. And I said, well, who was the taxi driver? I said, could you put me in touch? He said, yeah, he's a friend of mine. I said, well, that's what I need. I need an affidavit from him that he took you there, what actually happened. And so he took me and introduced me to the taxi driver. The taxi driver showed me his actual receipts from his printout from his machine in his cab. And he gave me an affidavit saying, yes, on this date, I took Kerry Gagan to the federal building. He got out, he went into the marshal's office, he delivered something there, then he came back and I took him home. So, you know, every time you go through one of these steps of an investigation, it can take weeks to set up. It can take days to actually go through all of these things, and then more days to decompress after you've done this. So anyway, we had a number of other very important inside witnesses who came forward like that. Now, when Kerry Gagan was giving me all this information and whatnot, all of the major media, all of a sudden he was a person of interest, so they were all looking for him. There were stories about him. Same with Carol Howe. But the New American, the New American was the one that came out with the story on that. And these were very important stories, not just big gotcha moments. These were very important pieces to the puzzle. And they should have been issues that all the media would jump on. I kept hoping that there would be some issue like this. This is huge. Somebody would break ranks and jump in on that. And sometimes we had Even at the New York Times, they had one ringer reporter there who usually wrote on the weekends, and the editors didn't stop her stories. And she got a couple of stories, even in the New York Times, that amplified what we had written about. So, but the Oklahoma City cover-up by the Clinton administration, and which they could not have done without the media complicity in this. It showed back then, during the Clinton administration, so that 25 years ago, that the media was in the tank totally with the Clintons and with all of the deep state back then. They kept rank, didn't break rank. They all contained the stories, except for some leaks here and there. And then when a reporter would go off the reservation and follow the evidence and do what reporters are supposed to do, like Jana Davis on the NBC station down in Oklahoma City, pressure came to bear upon the station, and she was let go from the station there. Jana Davis was one of the very few reporters, other than Ambrose Evans Pritchard, and he could only focus on it for a short time, a few months. She focused on it for a couple of years. John Cash, who has since passed away, he was a very important reporter for the McCurtain Gazette, a small newspaper in Arkansas. And he did some very important work. And none of us could have gotten very far without the help of Glenn and Kathy Wilburn, the grandparents of Chase and Colton Wilburn, who were killed in the Chase and Colton Smith, who were killed in the daycare center at the Murrah building. They were dogged and very persistent, and they delved into all of this. And because they were, it was clear that they were not in this for their own gratification or glorification, but to get to the bottom of this, a lot of people opened up to them. And so I met many times at their home with other witnesses and survivors, and thanks to them and to Jannie Coverdale. Jannie Coverdale lost her two grandchildren in the bombing as well, and she became one of our most important sources and allies in this investigation. And then foremost of all those, out of the whole political structure there in Congress and the state legislature, Representative Charles Key was really the hero in all of this. Representative Charles Key went out on a limb. He very doggedly pursued this, and in spite of all the media attacks on him, he continued to take a very responsible, reasonable approach to this and say, look, we have to look at the evidence. We can't, this is too important. We can't let it be swept under the rug. And so I can't say enough to praise Representative Charles Key.
Now, Bill, with the last 9 minutes here, I wanted to make sure that we got into some of these strange occurrences with witnesses. You alluded to the fact that some of them met their demise under strange circumstances, and then you'd also, we could discuss some evidence that perhaps has never been really covered or written about. So I wanted to make sure that we gave enough time to actually cover both of those two topics.
Okay. Let's just go with one, probably the most extreme case of a witness, Sergeant Terry Yakey from the Oklahoma City Police Department. Wonderful guy. I never met him, talked with him on the phone. He was one of the heroes of the bombing. He arrived there very early on the scene, one of the first responders to arrive there. He's a great big guy, and probably, I think he was 6'5" and 250 pounds. Anyway, he ran in and out of the building as things were falling down and everybody else was moving back, and he dragged out many people who were dead or dying or trapped out of the building with disregard to his own safety. He was injured in the process, but he was still on the force. And he was not satisfied, I guess to put it lightly, with the official verdict. And he said, well, when he arrived there at the building, he saw bomb squad vehicles outside of the building, which had to have been there already. He said because the guys were already out of their vehicles, um, and he said, and there were other things that weren't adding up to the official story. So I scheduled to go and interview him, but before I could, committed suicide, or so it was said. However, and uh, we still haven't published this, although we may do it. I did do some interviews, some video interviews with his mother, his brother, his wife, um, and they all agreed that no, he would not commit suicide. He was going through some tough times, but his mother was a very courageous woman, and I went and interviewed her. She uh, pointed out that the coroner's report, the medical examiner's report, said that he had slashes all over him, that was shot with a gun, his throat was slit, he had
Wow.
burn marks from cigarettes or cigarette lighters on him. Uh, and she said it was clear that he had been tortured. And she said, how does a man cut his own throat like that after he's been shot in the head? I said, so you saw that his throat was cut? She said, yes, I personally examined it. She said, with my fingers, I saw right up here on his, she said, I parted it there. He was cut all the way back to his backbone. So
That is not a typical way for
No.
somebody to commit suicide,
Yeah.
number one.
It's just physically impossible.
So, there were a number of cases like this where, there a number of people who were witnesses had been threatened, had calls made, and people parking outside their homes, and so we had to actually get people to go and stand watch with them, to park outside their homes so they'd feel secure. I had to change the locations a number of times, and because I was constantly being threatened. And one of the people threatening me, who we were able to identify, I was able to identify his voice on a number of times. This I have written about briefly, because he was very notorious uh, racist and troublemaker by the name of Dennis Mahon. He was head of the White Aryan Resistance, his own brand, and it was head of the Ku Klux Klan of Oklahoma. And he was connected with a rural compound that we wrote about quite a bit, Elohim City. And he called me up on my phone out of state when I was living in California at the time, to my home phone, which he was able to get the number, and threatened not just me, but my children, my wife, with very nasty things, which he said over the phone and which was recorded on my recording. And after this, I went to the FBI with it. They said, whoa, we've been looking for something like this to get him. Well, Dennis Mahon had been doing things for many years that should have gotten him arrested, convicted, and put in prison. Many of his associates were, but he seemed to have this charmed life. Well, after I gave them the evidence from the tape, they said, oh, he's toast now. We've got him now, because that's a federal offense, calling interstate, threatening bodily harm and death to someone. So, but nothing happened. And it turns out nothing happened until several years later, when he and his brother, twin brother, were prosecuted for sending a letter bomb to a public official, which blew off part of the gentleman's fingers. And then they were sent to prison. But during the trial, he tried to use as a defense that he was a federal protected witness, a federal asset, which is what many of us had thought all along, because he was always able to skate free. But in this particular case, finally, they decide, well, we bet he's kind of a loose cannon. We better throw him in prison. They did.
Incredible. So we've got about 2 minutes left, Bill, and so what I'd like to do is kind of put some bookends on exactly what occurred here.
Okay, so we have only touched on a couple of the major strands of this, which is the foreknowledge, the multiple bombs, the multiple accomplices, and there were many others as well. The long and short of it is, you'll have to have me come back again.
Yes, for
and
sure.
because of the COVID-19 special issue, the April 19th anniversary, Oklahoma City got, but we are going to be putting together that, as well as a new set of links on our website, including all of the evidence from the ATF records, the FBI records, that we at one time had up online, but we had sabotage a number of times that took our website down, and those things have never gotten back up. We're going to be doing that, but the long and short of it is this. On April 19, 1995, this massive bombing took place in Oklahoma City. People were killed, many were wounded, but the biggest casualty was American freedom. We got all of the new federal legislation at that time taken away, just like after 9/11 we got the Patriot Act and whatnot. We had all kinds of restrictions put on firearms and explosives, and it terrorized all of the conservatives. Everybody went back into their holes because, as Bill Clinton said, that changed everything. Nobody wanted to be what Time magazine said. If you didn't buy the government's line that Timothy McVeigh did this, that you were an ideational co-conspirator with Timothy McVeigh.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, all right. Well, Bill Jasper has been our guest on Church and State. We really appreciate you joining us, sir. Thank you very much. Go to thenewamerican.com to read more about this interesting subject. All right. Church and State is brought to you in part by Covenant Church and Mountain View Vital Medicine. Always remember, the tree of liberty is most likely a birch. And with that, Church and State is out.
God bless.